Okay, we're ready to go now. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Chris Burke and I'm the Director of Partner Engagements here at SpinifexIT, and we welcome you for this session today on Payroll Control Center. We've got a little bit of things to go over before we actually get started into the webinar session. To make the most out of this session for you today, just a few things to keep in mind. You are using GoToWebinar, so you are going to be seeing slides. If you don't see those slides now, you will want to log into your computer to actually see the slide deck that is being presented as well as the demonstration. If you do have any questions, you should see a box, either marked questions or a little question mark that you can click on and type those in. I'll be monitoring that throughout the session. And at the end of the hour, we will go ahead and have some time for question and answers for the speakers to respond. Anything that you come up with afterwards, of course, you can always email to us, and the email address here is info@spinifexit.com. And then in addition to that, we'll make sure that you have registered today, so you will get a copy. And if you are a current customer of SpinifexIT, you'll be able to access this session on the portal as well. So for today, we're going to go over a few things. We're going to talk about the introductions. I'm going to introduce our speakers to you. We're going to talk about SAP's Payroll Control Center, and you're going to be getting an overview of what that is. We're going to actually talk to you about how to improve your PCC experience as well with SpinifexIT, and then actually see a live demonstration. And then after that, as I mentioned earlier, we will be having some time for wrap-up and discussion questions. So our first speaker up today is a gentleman that we have worked with a lot here at SpinifexIT. His name is Mike Timm. He's been a consultant in the world for a long time. He's been with Integrated Consulting Group, as you can see, for a long time. He's also a SAP Payroll Certified Consultant. So he's very knowledgeable in the payroll world, has had a lot of experience both on-premise and in the cloud. So we're proud to have Mike with us today doing his section on SAP PCC. And then after Mike, we will have SpinifexIT's Stephen Gallo, who's our North American product architect. He's actually going to be walking you through our solution, as well as a product demonstration and how it works. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike Timm.
Thank you, Chris. And I do want to thank you and Spinifex for having me join you today. When we were preparing for this, it was very interesting going through and discussing and discovering things that would be helpful to the different customers and folks to talk about with Payroll Control Center. The first thing that I actually wanted to cover was last week I ran a webinar where we have SAP customers only attend, and one of the things we do is we share information between the customers, but we also did some polls. And so I wanted to share some of the poll results that I found especially interesting, and some of it more surprising than others. And the first one is that of the customers, 78% of them said that they're planning for the cloud. There's still some that haven't really started, or they talk about it, but as a company, they haven't really made the decision of when or how they're going to do that. And the other two things that kind of related to that were very interesting to me was that 30% of the customers that we polled said they aren't going to move to the cloud until SAP is going to really pull the plug. So they're hoping that SAP is going to push back the 2030 dates. And then a couple of the other ones, about a third of customers take 2 days. I thought that was kind of eye-opening. Always try to get companies to try to narrow it down to 1 day of payroll processing, just to make their lives a little bit easier, but also any downtime that may cause. And then the last one that was very interesting, there was a question that had 4 or 5 areas where the folks could answer to what components of the payroll process cause them problems. And 100% of them said reporting was an issue. So I knew that was probably going to be high percentage. I didn't expect that everybody on that call was going to say that reporting, standard SAP reporting was an issue. So I think that kind of lends well with what we're going to get going into. And this is just that question displayed, where the different things are with those customers. So again, it's one of the areas that during implementations, during support projects, all those types of things I've run into quite a bit. And the Payroll Control Center will help alleviate some of those issues. And I think that with some of the tools and the alerts that Stephen's going to get into, we can see how we push as much of the reporting issues or types of things that we use reporting for to the front end of the payroll process instead of the back end. So I think that'll be positive. And then the next area to cover is, why do we want to use the Payroll Control Center? And there's, as you can see on the slide, there's quite a few different areas. But one of the big things is, again, like I said previously, we got to start pushing some of the audits. So the alerts that we talk about, the KPIs, those types of things, we got to push that very, very much earlier in the process when we utilize the Payroll Control Center. The nice thing about it is we finish a payroll process, we can immediately then move over to monitoring, which can start looking at certain activities like, do we have all the master data? Do we have info type 9s? Do we have cost centers? Any of these things that typically when we get to payroll day, we find when we have issues with the payroll process itself. But some of the other things too is we get to start seeing what controls do we have. There's a lot of built-in audit controls. We can take notes throughout the process. We can assign roles to different people. We have managers and administrators, which ones can actually proceed in some of the steps, process steps. But then we also get a very nice view or a dashboard of where the payroll process is. And this really comes in handy if you have multiple payroll areas. I can see that, hey, I have 8 payroll areas and this week is our busy week. All 8 of them are running Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at different times. And we get to see where in the process they are. Oh, we have one that has a high number of alerts. What's the issue there? What can we do? But again, that's during the payroll process. We could have already started the monitoring process a week or 2 before that and captured or fixed a majority of those types of issues. So it's very, very powerful from that standpoint. The other thing that comes along with this is that it is an add-on. So this is something that you have to have certain level of enhancement pack and then also support packs. And the more up-to-date you are, so if you're on enhancement pack 8 and you're very much caught up on the support packs, the underlying functionality you're going to have access to is going to be a lot better than if you're on enhancement pack 7 and the functionality available there. The overall goal of this is to make our payrolls more accurate. So if we're in a process now and we're happy, we're at 98, 99% accuracy of checks going out the door, and we want to try to get those last 1 or 2%, we can use the Payroll Control Center to do that. I think the return on the investment is actually pretty quick when we're using the Payroll Control Center. Let's go on to there we go. The other thing with the Payroll Control Center is we get to use our existing payrolls and schemas and wage types and variants for reports if we build those into the Payroll Control Center. We don't have to change any of those. So it's a configuration on setup that we go through to set up the Payroll Control Center. And typically you want to use the SAP Rapid Deployment System, so they're RDS, because it gives you everything that you need from a base standpoint. There's some additions and some tweaks like anything SAP that you're going to want to do. But it's very much something that SAP has thought through. Their RDS is actually quite good for the Payroll Control Center. And I think it's a very useful place to start. Again, you might not use everything, but at least you have it there and you can see how SAP would plan to start it up. The other thing with the Payroll Control Center is we don't have to go full bore on this. We don't have to say, okay, we've got 8 payroll areas, we're going to move all of them onto Payroll Control Center. We can do this more slowly. We can say, let's do 1, let's see how it goes, let's work through our different alerts, let's work through our KPIs, what's actually useful to us, what's not. And once we get that 1 up and running, then we can start running it for the other ones. It won't impact the payroll process for the other ones. So it's not a 1 or an all or nothing type of deal. I think that's very, very good. And again, auditing payroll results, we start that early in the process. We capture and we catch as much as possible. The more data you're feeding into the system early on, so if you're getting time loads, you're running time evaluation. If you're on-prem on a daily basis, you get to start seeing all that data and how it's flowing through. So you can start watching from day 1 in your payroll cycle that we're having a high level of overtime, or we have a whole bunch of bonuses, or we have a lot of employees that are doing retroactivity. So you can start identifying that and working through that before payroll day even comes along. So what is the Payroll Control Center? So we talked a little about why you want to use it, because it'll help you out. It'll push some of the audits you can do earlier on. But what is it? So it is an add-on, and it's role-based. So we have two main roles. We have the payroll manager, and then we have the payroll administrator. So the manager is going to be the person that looks at the processes overall, might be the person that's going in and assigning alerts if you don't automate that piece. And just making sure everything's getting done. And they're also the one that's probably going in and doing final approvals. Yes, we're done with the monitoring step. Yes, we're done with our production step. Yes, we're done with our subsequent activities. And during those steps where they are approving those, there's places where you can add notes. So from an audit standpoint, you could say, yes, this manager took care of this and approved it. And even though there might have been some alerts out there that weren't resolved, they signed off on it. So it really helps from an audit standpoint. It's a much better user experience. So if you're currently going through, and I'm always a little bit surprised how many companies still have their payroll departments running the entire payroll process manually instead of using my process models. The Payroll Control Center will make it much easier to run the process, and it will also make it so you can't miss steps. So the Payroll Control Center processes like monitoring have 4, 5, 6 steps in them, and you have to go in sequence to get those done. And it keeps you honest on that from that standpoint. But also at different points, you can look at the underlying programs to see how they're doing and those types of things. So it gives you a lot of control over those areas and make sure you don't miss steps, which is really good. The other thing too is that it's a lot more intuitive. When I go and I work on Payroll Control Center, I can go through the steps very quickly. I don't have to remember transaction codes or go back to a menu path. And then the big thing on there is the alerts. I like to get the feedback. So if an employee doesn't have a cost center, I know that immediately. I can go resolve that. And then I can also put notes in with some of those things. So you can resolve these issues. You see how they're handled. And then the alert will automatically, after a few minutes, depending on how often you set some of the backend processes to run, it will clear itself out. And then you have that audit history all the way through the process, which is nice. So right now we have 3 main areas or phases of Payroll Control Center. We have monitoring. So this is the one that's really where you gain the biggest amount of functionality, in my opinion. This is not something you can do manually, and it's not something that you can do through process models if you've configured those. So the monitoring actually is running payroll. It's not running live payroll, it's running a test payroll. So it's not really simulation either, because it's actually generating results and it's throwing those results into declustered tables that sit on your SAP system. And we'll talk about those in the next slide or two, a little bit about declustering. But you actually get to start reporting off of those. And that's where, like the SpinifeX tool, and that's where alerts and those types of things actually start looking. And so I can start seeing actual errors that are happening in payroll, but I can also see actual results. So even if I'm not sending in time and my benefits interfaces come in typically on a Friday, but I run payroll on a Monday, when those come in on Friday, I can then see how that's going to react to my payroll. Is it going to cause me any issues or any problems? And I can actually report off of those and say, okay, it looks like this is reasonable compared to previous periods. And again, this is all before we've gone into the production payroll. Once we go through the monitoring phase, we end that and we sign off on that. The payroll manager does. We can then move on to our production, which is going to be very similar to what you have now. More than likely, it's the same steps. It's done through the web browser and is very simple and straightforward. Again, we might have the same alerts that we had for monitoring, or we might have some additional ones. But we can do posting to accounting simulations, pre-DME simulations, all those types of things in production, and get feedback on if we have issues, and then we can go resolve those very, very quickly. And then the final step is subsequent. So this is where we would go in, we would use Payroll Control Center to run our posting to accounting, our DME. You can have reports run at this point. And if you have any custom interfaces, there's a few lines of code where you could actually go and run those interfaces as well. So here's what the Payroll Control Center looks like, and Stephen's going to get into more detail with all this. But this is what I was talking about. We have four different, actually a few different payrolls running here. Some of them we have in monitoring phase, and that's where here we call it simulation, January 2016. So we know we're 2/3 the way in. We have 368 alerts, and so now we need to go and we can assign those. Some of the newer functionality from SAP now has teams. So instead of assigning to an individual person, we can go assign it to a team, and then the team can whittle away at that. And where I've seen in previous examples of things like this, you might have a group of people that are focused on taxes, or a group of people that are focused on garnishments, and we can get these assigned to them, and they can always go back here and they can see at any time, okay, our group, our team, or I individually have 20 alerts. I'm working through those, and as they go down, I can see what's left. It makes it very simple to keep a running total of where we are in our process. And then the manager again can go in and see exactly where things are. We also have some different areas, so upcoming processes, so we can see, hey, what's coming up for tomorrow or for the next day, and we have completed processes as well. So we can go back and historically see, when did we run a process, when did it complete? If you've ever had issues where an interface file didn't send, or the timing of it is in question, you can see when exactly our payroll process ended and when the interface. So it's very simple to keep track of those things now. Let's move on to the next. There we go. Okay, so declustering. Declustering is one of the questions I always get immediately is, what's it going to take? How hard is it? You know, can we even do something like this? And so the very first answer to that is, you don't have to use declustered tables for the Payroll Control Center. However, you lose all of the best functionality because you no longer are putting that data into those declustered tables so that alerts and everything else can be done. So the monitoring phase pretty much becomes useless. There's still some functionality that would be helpful with master data, but the actual payroll results themselves, without those, you lose a lot of the best functionality. So that's the big thing. So second thing is configuring the actual declustered payrolls is very simple, and we have a lot of flexibility on things like how much space, disk space this is going to take. And that's one of the questions I always get from IT early on is, well, if we're declustering the tables and we have the regular clustered tables, all of a sudden we're duplicate and we have all this stuff. Well, we have a couple things that we can do. One is we don't have to set all of the tables to be declustered. We can say we want the WBPP, RT, and a couple others that we want to be able to report off of or create alerts from to actually be declustered. So that reduces the amount of space right away because we're not doing all of them. The other thing you can do is say, I only want to keep a certain time period's worth of declustered tables. So I only want to keep one pay period back or two pay periods back because the rest of it I really don't need. Most of the built-in KPIs that come from and alerts that come from SAP and in their RDS are going to be based on the previous period. So disk space wise, it really ends up not being much of an issue. The other thing is the actual setup of it is done through the IMG, and it only takes about 5 minutes. Once you've defined which tables we want, which time period we want, it only takes about 5 minutes to set these things up configuration wise, and then it's ready to go. So I know the first time I did it, I got to the end of the configuration step and I was like, okay, I've got to be missing something. This was way too easy. And so I asked, is this it? And you know, Payroll Control Center, I was able to go run that, and it was it. So it was confirmation that it was very, very simple. And then the final bullet there, it really explains it out. The declustering is actually the simplest part of the PCC. So you have to discuss tables and time period. Really, that goes fairly quickly, and it's one of those things you can always adjust to. So if you limit your tables too much, or you decide, hey, I want to keep a longer time period, those are very, very simple steps to go and adjust. It's not, once I make a decision now, I'm stuck with it. So again, very, very simple piece of the Payroll Control Center, and really nothing to worry about whatsoever. All right, so what's a typical project look like? Again, I always like to start with the SAP RDS. Reason for that is to give us all the base configuration. You can copy and adjust as you need from there. The gathering your existing variants. If you're assuming you're an existing SAP payroll user, gathering all your variants, making sure the schemas and all those types of things. We don't have to adjust any of that. We just have to know exactly what you're using, and obviously what payroll cycles. So how many payroll areas do you have? Are they biweekly, weekly, monthly, those types of things? Payroll. So once we get the RDS installed, which again, that only takes a little bit of time, half day probably with confirmation, everything, we go in and we start setting up all of your customer specific items. Now, depending on how many payroll areas you have, how complex you want to get with some of these things, it can extend that time period. But if you want to try to stick with the basics at first, it's very, very quick process. And then you end up doing a lot of testing. And it's very, very straightforward because we can go in, we can test, we can run monitoring processes, we can report, use wage type reporter, payroll reconciliation report, the SpinifeX tools to report all that out and compare that against what a production run if we ran it manually or through a process model would look like. So we have a lot of options there on setting these up. Where things have gotten really beneficial, I would say, is when we get to use the SpinifeX Payroll Control Center RDS. The reason for that is SAP, as part of their RDS, does provide 30 or so alerts, and some of those are very, very useful. Some of them I haven't found much use in the different projects. And there are some configuration settings you can do to start looking for things. However, you start getting more to the ABAP development, and where I like working with Steven and SpinifeX is they're able to come in and remove that development, that ABAP development piece of it, because you use their tools. So a bulk of, and Steven will get into this in a lot more detail, they put their RDS and then they get a plan out. And so that's another thing that kind of alleviates the timeline for your IT group or your consultants that are helping you put in the actual Payroll Control Center itself. Because he works through all those alerts, and then they insert theirs in a couple places, and it just works, and it works very well. And then we move on to testing all our processes that we built with all the new alerts that we have from SpinifeX, and then we move to production. And it's a very short, compressed timeline for most SAP add-on type implementations or implementations with new functionality. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Steven so he can get into the details of how SpinifeX fits in here and why it really helps out our projects.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. So hello, everybody. My name is Steven Gallo. As Chris mentioned, I'm the product architect for North America for SpinifexIT. And I really just want to talk about three concepts today. And we're going to do it visually through the deck. We have a couple slides here, but then we're actually going to go in the system and see where they get actually applied out there. Mike talked about the different components of Payroll Control Center. We're going to primarily focus on the policies and the alerts. You'll hear that term used interchangeably in the SAP world, because there is some configuration, some work that it goes to getting in place. So what I'm going to show you is, one, how we can get them in faster and the reasons why. Two, your payroll's, never ending, right? You're not going to just do this once or to change it. So we're going to talk about how you can use your ongoing maintenance. And not only that, more importantly, is that's great that I can show you an alert that something occurred during your payroll, but how do we solve it and do the research on that alert faster directly from Payroll Control Center? To understand what we've done with Payroll Control Center at SpinifexIT, you have to understand the history of one of our main products, which happens to be our Easy Reporter solution. Our Easy Reporter solution has been around for about 15 years, and what it allows customers to do is report across modules in a single report. Those modules could be obviously payroll, maybe posting, time, personal administration, employee central is on this list too. And what our customers were doing were the types of things that you do that in Payroll Control Center, right? They were doing payroll audits, right? So once payroll was calculated, before you closed it, they would run an audit to say, all right, what's my total net? What's my total gross? What's somebody who had gross pay that's more than $5,000 than last period? What's somebody who is terminated who has quota? right? They were using those things for those core policies that you get with Payroll Control Center. And of course, they were using it before payroll ran, like for the master data audits, like Mike mentioned, find me people missing a bank, find me people who's lived in and worked in the country is different, right? Because Easy Reporter gives you the ability to put these reports together because we have access to this plethora of data out here. It's localized in a ton of countries, pretty much from a payroll standpoint. Doing an audit for any of the countries that we support is locked in. We have all the tables localized, whether it be taxes, garnishments, all those sorts of things. So that's the history behind it, right? So let's say you're at mature. I always talk about things in levels of maturity model. Let's say you're at maturity level 1, right? You're doing these audits with wage type reporter or ad hoc query there in SAP. Level 2 is what our customers were doing with Easy Reporter, right? They were using our tool, and there's obviously third-party tools out there that do this to determine to get these reports out faster. What we're going to talk about today is level 3, where we're using Payroll Control Center to see things visually and actually integrating all these nice little reports directly into Payroll Control Center to get you the audits that you need. Because that's really the primary focus of today. What does our integrated solution, what does Payroll Control Center look like in general? And how does our integrated solution make it faster, better, easier out there? That's the whole goal. Mike mentioned the whole goal. How do we get payroll faster, right? He talked about 98% accuracy, right? You got a 2% off cycle rate. That's fantastic. I know customers out there who don't even have that. And obviously, when you go live, your accuracy might not be stellar, right? You got to get stable. So what we can do with Payroll Control Center is we can now visually see where everything is, right? Through a nice, simple interface. And I'm even going to show you some interesting things today that when things occur within your payroll, ways to drill in and really see the root cause of what caused someone to have a problem out there, right? Payroll Control Center out of the box is very good at telling you things that are wrong. I'm going to take you a little farther down the rabbit hole today with the SpinifeX solution so we can actually see why they're wrong or what occurred with it out there. That's kind of the goal of the SpinifexIT solution. Because as Mike mentioned, and because this is kind of where SpinifeX plays, what's the best part of Payroll Control Center? And that would be the one-click monitoring out there. So you have a business payroll process up here, like you can see up here in the top left, it's running a simulation. There's a reporting step, and then it's initiating the policies. And what the policies do is they're audits, if you would, that are very specific. For example, if you're looking at this list, high net pay, people missing different bits of master data, retro pay over a certain amount, we're actually going to look specifically at that one today. It's going to tell you that this employee has these problems with certain thresholds, right? Maybe it's retro pay over an amount, and for your company, it's $2,000. Some other companies, they might want retro pay over an amount that's over $3,000. Those are the only people they want to see. So this is the best part about it, because the neat thing is it'll tell you this, and then you go fix it in Payroll Control Center and say, okay, you know what, we fixed this employee. And if in the middle of the week, someone changes their master data again, and it causes a problem, it'll recalculate them, and you'll see the problem pop up. So that's the nice part about one-click monitoring. It's always looking at your people to make sure that they're in check with your specific policies and rules for your payroll. And this is the gist. If you guys understand this, you'll kind of understand where the SpinifexIT solution fits in. SAP delivers their RDS, as Mike mentioned, and it's great, right? It comes with all the steps that you would need to run a payroll: opening payroll, closing payroll, DME, pre-DME, posting, all that sort of stuff. And it also comes with a policy engine out there to do those things like high net, no net. And what we came ahead and did and said, hey, you know what? Let's take our Easy Reporter reports and make them a policy engine as well. And what you're going to find in here is that the flexibility of having Easy Reporter as a policy engine is a little superior to SAP's, because we're going to be able to do some different things that will make changing and implementing Payroll Control Center faster, and also doing the research on these policies to determine if something's actually, or what actually caused the policy to occur. We'll talk about that over the next few slides, and then we'll jump into the system out there. Because that's actually the worst part about the Payroll Control Center. It's actually configuring the policies. So SAP, as they mentioned, comes with 30 to 40 policies and out there, and that's great. But you're going to want to make changes, like I said. You might have retro pay. The base policy might come with, find me people with retro pay over $1,000. And you say, no. For our company, it should be $3,000. You'd only want to see people with that amount of level of problem. You go, okay, then you have to call your IT department, and they have to go into the IMG, SAP configuration, find the parameter that's used on that policy for that $1,000, change it to $3,000, save it, and then promote it through the track. You can imagine, like anything else that takes transport, it's not instant. Also, when it comes to a level of complexity that I see at most of our customers, for example, find me people with net pay over 500 bucks could be a policy. But in your organization, you might be like, hey, you know what? Find me hourly people with net pay over 500, but only find me salary people over net pay who live in Cincinnati with net pay over $5,000. As you add in those different criteria that are delivered out of the box, you're then writing code, right? SAP might give you a couple parameters and thresholds you can use. If you want to go beyond using what parameters and thresholds they gave you, you're going to be writing code. Now we know how that always works out. But with Easy Reporter, every policy that SAP delivers, we actually deliver that as a report. And they look, smell, and taste exactly like a Payroll Control Center policy. You'll never know, your end users would never know that they're using Easy Reporter to generate these things. It's 100% fully integrated. And because of our solution is a reporting engine and not code-based, we can pretty much create these things in about 85% less time compared to the standard SAP, because we're going to update the parameters directly in Easy Reporter. We're not going through config. We're not promoting through the track, although there are ways to do that if you want to. We're going to make some changes and do the testing directly in Easy Reporter. I'll even show you how that works today, because we're going to look at a timeline to say, where are we actually making the improvements in your project time? Another thing is, and this is not something that you would know unless you've ever seen PCC or seen the config, there's all these little screen elements in Payroll Control Center, like the screenshot you're looking at now, right? This specific policy, it looks like people with a net pay difference over a certain amount. It's showing you the employee number, their current pay, their previous pay. But you, depending on the policy, you might want to see different things on the screen, maybe a subgroup, maybe a union indicator, something that helps you decide what to do with this specific person out there. Any screen element change, you're definitely going and writing some code and doing some config out there. We've actually integrated all the screens themselves into reports in Easy Reporter, where if I want to change an item on the screen, I literally got to drag and drop a field. And I know you don't know what that looks like or the complexities that actually occur without that, but we're not just making policy simpler, we're making everything about that policy or alert simpler. The things you want to see, what's being called, and then eventually we're going to get into the research out there. Because this is what we're saving you from, right? The software development life cycle of death, right? Because if you have to change one of these things, you're going to install your RDS and you go, hey, you know what? We have to change this policy. Let's go ahead and create a functional spec, right? And then you're going to send that to IT, and the developer's going to make a change, and you're going to do the testing, and oh, it's not going to work, right? I can say this because I used to be a developer too. We break stuff now and again. It's got to go back, right? The developer's got to fix it. It's got to go back to testing, and then you're in this cycle of death right there, just going and going till eventually it works, right? What we're trying to say is you don't have to do that. We can drastically shorten the times to implement. After I show you the solution in there, you'll get it. So let's talk about a timeline of where we're trying to save you the business process dollars out there, right? When it comes to installing the RDS, and this is linear, right? Obviously, certain things to Mike's timeline can occur at the same time. But when you're standing up Payroll Control Center, you obviously have to install it. That's going to take the same amount of time regardless. You're definitely going to have to do the blueprinting. You're going to have to look at the policies and alerts that are out there and your payroll processes to make sure they get tweaked or how you want to tweak them. But then it comes to the implementation, right? Because if you tweak a bunch of policies without a rapid deployment solution like SpinifexIT, you're going to be writing code. So your implementation time is going to take longer, right? With the Easy Reporter side of the fence, your implementation time is shorter because we're really just building reports. We're not actually writing code. And not only that, our testing can be done a whole lot faster too, because as Mike alluded, we report off the declustered data in our solution. What I'm getting at is if you change a policy using the standard RDS, so let's say you change a threshold, you got to save that. You have to load the policy in the Payroll Control Center. You then have to rerun the monitoring step to make that work so that you can see the policy pop. If it pops any individuals. With the Easy Reporter solution, we're technically building a report. I can change that report and then run it directly against the declustered data right then and there, see my result that's coming back, and be very, very confident that when I put this report in the Payroll Control Center, it's going to give me the same result out there. So that's really what we're talking about. We're saving you time on implementation and testing. And we're looking at this right now from an installation going live kind of standpoint. Implementation and testing are those phases that still occur in the future, right? If you're going to go change a policy or you're going to implement a new one because you found a new business process you want to improve upon or audit, you got to do that same process. We got to implement something, we got to test it, right? So we're trying to save you the time now and then save you the time later with that. And here's the final thing, or two final things actually before we get in there, where we go a step further. So I'm going to show you today how Easy Reporter and the SpinifexIT PCC RDS can improve your policies, but I'm also going to show you how they improve your research, right? Because what we allow you to do is PCC is going to tell you something's wrong, right? And in this case, because this is the scenario we're going to look at, someone's going to have a retro over a certain amount, and you're going to go, you know what, PCC, thank you, that's great, but why? And what was it? What caused the retro? Well, what we're going to show you today is right from within Payroll Control Center. I can drill in to this person's wage types, and see exactly where the retro occurred and on what wage types it happened on out there. And even I'm going to show you next step. It's not in these slides, but I'm actually going to show you what piece of master data changed that caused this retro to occur without ever having to go back into the payroll system and figuring out what actually happened out there. And the last portion is we're a reporting company. Well, I didn't say we're reporting. We're a business process improvement company. Our flagship product happens to be reporting. It would behoove us not to build reporting as a step in a process. So if you're looking at the screenshot on the bottom left here, reporting can actually be built directly in the Payroll Control Center. This is a feature the standard RDS doesn't have, right? So you can run your specific processes, post payroll, bank files, all that stuff, and then boom, you can kick off all your reports out of Easy Reporter right within Payroll Control Center, right? It's not an extra activity where you have to go back into the system and kick these things off. They can be run directly as part of your payroll process and accessed directly from Payroll Control Center. The typical time of every consultancy, I've talked to, and even SAP themselves, when you get quoted on, hey, we want to stand up PCC, it's like, the movie The Money Pit. How long is this going to take? 2 weeks. Well, what I hear from them is 2 to 3 months, right? All the time. I hear 2 to 3 months. We've put together project plans, and with our accelerator, we're confident that we can get this thing up and running in 3 to 4 weeks out there, and me and Mike have proven it out before. So keep that in mind. That's really what we're talking about here. Drastic savings with an accelerator like ours. So with that, let's pop over into Payroll Control Center. I'm going to do a headphone swap here because I think we're having a battery problem. Just give me 1 second. All right, there we go. Hey, Chris, can you come off mute? Can you still hear me?
Yes, sir.
Perfect, thank you. All right, first off, let's start within Payroll Control Center. Let me just refresh this page here because it might have signed me out. No, session's still good. What Mike was referring to, the different roles that are out there. You have payroll managers and you have payroll administrators, and there's a couple different files in here to talk about. I'm going to talk about the payroll manager side of the fence this first so we can understand it when we go solve these alerts, what we're actually solving in here. Inside of process management, if you do nothing with Payroll Control Center, if you don't build alerts, if you don't build policies, if you do nothing else, I think this is worth its weight in gold as a payroll manager, because I can see at any point in time where my different payroll areas are currently sitting. Is it a live payroll, and what phase are they in? They're in the monitoring phase, right? We can actually visually see everything that's going on, because it could be at a different step. This is at monitoring, but let's go in. Right, and this is just a very short setup because of for the sake of demonstration, right? This step's at monitoring, but the payroll could be running, the payroll could be over, right? You can see on that prior screen where all of your payrolls are at any point in time, which is you don't have to call anybody or email anybody. Where's the weekly payroll at? You can just go and look. So at a minimum, I think that's what's awesome about Payroll Control Center out there, and it gives you some nice, KPIs and some information. This is a demo box, so they're not really great out here. But you can get some key metrics right regarding your payroll right here. And this is a short one, right? This starts payroll, runs it, eventually ends it. You would have things like Mike set up here, the steps, the predefined steps like the DME or the pre-DME, the DME, the postings, all that stuff there. So you can see which step your payroll is in. And again, to Mike's point, you can't skip it, right? It's not like, oops, we hired a new payroll person. They forgot to run DME this week. That's impossible, right? With Payroll Control Center, you're going to get that quality out there because they can't go through a process. The one that they can't skip a process. The one that we're going to look at today is this U.S. monthly simulation. It's in July 2017. And this is what we mean by monitoring. You would kick this off, let's say, at the beginning of a week to run the payroll simulation. You'd kick off the policies about that data that was run, stored in your decluster tables, and then the monitoring step is just running. And this thing would just run, say, all week if you're doing a weekly payroll. And it will find these alerts out there. You can see they're all assigned to one individual in this system. But from Mike's point, these alerts, and we'll see what they are in a minute, can be assigned to various individuals out there. Because the other role out there might be one of the administrators or someone else, right? They might be going into their error management system here to see what policies they have that they have to work on. So I'm logged in here as SpinPCC, and you can see across the different payroll areas, this monthly simulation is live, and then our July 2017 simulation, the errors that have been assigned to me that I have to work on, right? These are the policies and alerts, people in bad positions, people in bad countries, separated with net pay. But the one we're going to look at today is this, retro pay over amount. There are two people in this policy, or alert, if you would. So we got Chris and we got Braden. So I think the threshold we set to this was find me people with retro pay that was over $1,000, right? So this guy had $6,000 in retro gross, and we see some things about it. And this is kind of where PCC, standard PCC stops, right? But what I'm going to show you is this. Why did this occur, right? Where is the $6,000 coming from? Because if I didn't have that, I'd have to go back into the SAP payroll system, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem, run some reports, go look in the cluster, look at master data, do all those things to try to figure out what caused this here. I can click right in, and then the SpinifexIT solution kind of takes hold again, right? We see some information about this employee. Again, all of this is configurable. If you wanted something up here like a union indicator, employee subgroup, you know, their address, state, you can change these things very simple. But for right now, for the sake of this demonstration, we're going to focus on solving this problem. Where did that $6,000 come from? Let's drill in. What we get is this reporting menu, and this is also customizable. I just have a few reports in here to try to determine what wage types occurred during this person's pay and possibly when. So I'm going to run this wage type drill down. And when I look at this scenario that's about to pop up, it's kind of simple in nature for demonstration, but let me explain. Where did his $6,000 in retro come from? Well, here we go. Here's our $6,000 in retro, and it's tied to his salaried wage type. And we can drill in and see, oh, that's right. It said it retro back 2 periods. We're in July. In period 6, here's was his original amount. Here's his current. And back to period 5, here's his original. Here's his current. So that's great. We now know at least it's with salary. And I like to think about it this way. I do this scenario because it's simple, because we can understand it during a demonstration. But this is the needle in the haystack scenario. You know, when retro occurs or anything like this, it could be one of 1,000 wage types out there. We're literally telling you right here from Payroll Control Center, without having to go anywhere else, what wage type caused the problem, right? And it could obviously be multiples out here that we're looking at. We have multiple changes that occurred that caused this. Because this is good. We now know that it's salary. And if I'm a experienced payroll person, I'm thinking to myself, well, you know what? That's probably related to his base pay. Well, let's go prove that, right? What we can do in Payroll Control Center, again, is we can also report, as well as we can report on the pay, is we can report on the master data changes that occurred. Let's go look at this guy's master data to see what changed during this period. Now, obviously, we said we're payroll practitioners. We looked at salary, and it will probably go assume his base pay changed. But again, could be anything, needle in the haystack. Obviously, his info type 8 changed. There are 3 during this period. Let's just scroll through this list, right? Okay, so it looks like his info type 8 did change during this period, right? We're running July. It changed. Somebody keyed it on 7/28. And they keyed it effective back in May, the 2 periods back based on the begin date here. And they did, in fact, change his annual salary from $120,000 to $162,000. It's probably pretty safe to say here that this policy is good. We can probably approve. We can probably go back to the policy, or right here. We can set this to resolve, and it's done. If it was something that we didn't understand, we could always forward this to another individual that might be responsible for this specific type of change. Maybe it was tax related or whatnot, and they can go take a look at it. But that's really the beauty of the SpinifexIT solution, in my opinion. Payroll Control Center is really great at telling you things that happened. It's doing that extra step of research where all that time comes into play, right? And obviously we're in here, we're looking at Easy Reporter based reports, but we don't know that, right? Everything looks, smells, and tastes exactly like Payroll Control Center. And here's where the testing portion comes in, right? So once you get live, this would be your user experience for your end users. But what about the testing, right? I said we can test things really fast. And some of you on this call have never seen Easy Reporter before, so let's just go into the payroll system and take a quick peek before we get out of this webinar. All right, so this is I'm just going to go to a transaction code here for Easy Reporter. I said we delivered a rapid deployment solution, RDS, and I'm going to show you why it's actually rapid, right? There's an RDS for every platform out there in the world. The R in our RDS, the rapid portion of it, I think actually holds true. Because what we deliver for you as reports that act as policies is this set of folders down here. Some are auditing master data, some are auditing payroll. For example, we have all these different reports that are the policies that fire off to find these people with a problem. For example, like people with retro pay over amount, right? There's a way that we built this report. It's very simple. If you, obviously you can look up our email address and we can give you a further demo on that stuff later in life. But essentially this report is what ran to show us our people, right? It actually ran for the payroll area, which we were running. Payroll Control Center said, hey, run this for period 7 for 2017. It passed those dates in, and it's looking at simulated data. Piece of cake, right? Thinking here we had the whole payroll area. Yep, so we got our people in here, and it ran. And this returned a result to Payroll Control Center to say, hey, these are those two guys that we saw on the list. The second guy down here is Braden, right? He's $6,000 out there. And then Payroll Control Center is obviously other reports that control the UI and things that we saw, but this at its minimum is the report that generated that problem. Here's where the changes come into play. You go to install an RDS with SAP and you're like, oh, you know what? We don't want this to be the $1,000. We want this to be $7,000. So only this guy shows up. You would have to go in the IMG, make a bunch of changes, transport that through the track. Here with Easy Reporter, I can sit here and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to make it $7,000 right now. And here's the cool thing. I don't have to save it, transport it, move it, and then put it in Payroll Control Center to test it, right, and rerun monitoring to see if it actually fires off. I can change my value here and go, hey, let's see if this works. Yep, we got the population that we think should be coming in based on our policies in our organization. Let's save this. It'll automatically publish out the Payroll Control Center, and we're good to go. So with that, we're kind of almost to the top of the hour. I want to thank you guys for taking some time with me today. And Mike and Chris, I'm going to flip it back over to you for any questions.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you, Mike, for your time today. Really appreciate it. Very exciting and insightful stuff. We did get a handful of questions coming through today, so I'm going to go ahead and just fire them off. It looks like some are directed to Mike and some are directed to Steve. So the first one is for Mike. What version of SAP do you have to be on to run Payroll Control Center?
So there's actually two answers to that. So if you're an employee central payroll, you should be able to have Payroll Control Center put in place right now. If you are an on-premise customer, the minimum that you need to be at is Enhancement Pack 7, and there's certain with HR Renewal 2.0, and you have to be fairly up to date on your support packs, which you probably are anyway with year end, so you're probably good there. The other is Enhancement Pack 8, and I'd have to say, if you're on Enhancement Pack 8 or you're looking for a project for Enhancement Pack 8, there's more functionality. So even though SAP has been rolling out new functionality for the Payroll Control Center, there is a variation. If you're on Enhancement Pack 7, there's less functionality available to you than there is on 8. So something just to kind of keep in mind. But you know, a lot of companies I know are moving towards that. But again, employee central payroll should be good to go as is.
Great, thank you, Mike. So the next question I have is actually probably for Mike as well. Is it possible to schedule a payroll to run at a specific time from Payroll Control Center, similar to how it happens in the traditional payroll driver?
So one of the things around the Payroll Control Center that we changed, and the answer is it depends, which I know everybody hates getting those questions or answers, but it really does. There's not a easy mechanism in place to do that. And the main reason is SAP has built the Payroll Control Center to give the ownership to the payroll department, mainly the payroll manager, to say, we are now ready to work on this next Payroll Control Center process. So they're going to initiate that. Now, the nice thing is, whether you're on-premise or SuccessFactors Employee Central Payroll, is all of that is web-based now. So you can get in there and you can set some of these things. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is the goal is to start capturing this in the monitoring phase. So this is the one-click monitoring or simulation or test payroll, depending on who you're talking with. But this is the part where we're actually running payrolls and it's going into the decluttered tables. So the monitoring, as soon as I'm ready, I don't have to wait. I can go in and run that. And you can have that process repeat. So it's constantly updating with new information. So by the time you are ready to run your payroll, you initiate that. Most of your issues, or hopefully all of your issues, have been resolved. So you've been doing that for a week. But again, Scheduling it, it's really focused on the payroll manager initiating those types of steps.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike. The next question I'm just going to throw out there and either one of you can answer. How can you utilize Payroll Control Center for large populations where you could have hundreds of alerts? Do you have to clear them one by one, or can you export the results and then import additional data?
So that is, I actually get that question a lot, and it's actually kind of a feature request out there right now for Payroll Control Center. The short answer to what you're asking is no. Right now it is individualized. There are a bunch of customers who have some, whatever they're called, inquiries open with SAP to get them to improve that process. And there is a new version of Payroll Control Center coming out, end of this year. I don't know, maybe it's Q1 of next year that fixes some of that.
I think the latest was probably mid next year, but
yeah,
I wouldn't bank on it.
Yeah, I agree with Mike on that. So the short answer to your question is no, you do have to process these people one at a time. And that's where the threshold policies become critical, right? So when I think about a threshold, there's all these exceptions because my customers come to me like, look, we don't care about this guy had net pay over $5,000 because he had this other thing as well. It's that other thing that if we knew he had, because we built it into the policy, these things would be better. Customers didn't do that when they originally put in the SAP RDS because it's too hard, because you have to evaluate all these different things. You have to write code to do it. We have the ability with the SpinifexIT solution to build in those tiny little exceptions in there to whittle down that list of 500 that's really broad to be like, you know what, no, it's really these 30 people that had the problem because there were all these other exceptions that these other people had that made them fine. If that answers your question.
I think kind of a follow-on to that too, though, is even if you have alerts out there, say you do have an alert that looks for something specific, and you've identified there's a couple hundred employees with that, you don't have to clear alerts to continue on in the process, but it will sit out there in your audit history, and your payroll manager is going to want to make a note of that it was acceptable that they left those alerts out there, unless it's something like a missing cost center or missing bank account or something like that.
Okay, great, thanks. I have two questions along the similar vein, so I'm going to try to wrap it up in one. Do you have to buy Easy Reporter to use Payroll Control Center, and can we use Easy Reporter without Spinifex RDS?
Yes, you can. The second part of your question is, can you use Payroll Control Center without the Spinifex RDS? Absolutely, right? And this SAP version is free. You can download it, install it, have somebody like Mike come and help you set it up. The other question is Easy Reporter is a full-on reporting application. You do not have to have the full version of it. That RDS folder that I showed you that had those handfuls of reports in there, we do have that as a separate package. So if you just wanted to use the 40 or so policies that we deliver to make it more easily to customize and things of that nature than going with the standard RDS, we do have separate pricing available for that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephen. And then I have two more questions for you, actually. One is, do the Payroll Control Center policies have to be transported through the track?
They do not. So Easy Reporter, I'm sorry, Mike, did you want to answer that?
Well, I may have missed part of it, but I was going to say, if it's the SAP alerts, yes, that's a total transport, dev QA, production, full configuration setup.
Yeah, so the SpinifexIT ones, you have the option. So you can do what I just did right now and log into production and change that threshold, press save, and be done. Or you do have the ability to take our reports and move them through dev, QA, and production through the track. I have customers who like to just do it and get it done, and I have other customers who follow specific policies where they're going from dev to QA to production. Chris?
Okay, great, thanks. And the last question is, I'm on premise today. If I'm using Payroll Control Center, I want to move to Employee Central Payroll. Is there any additional costs or charges or development that needs to be done to move to the cloud?
So if you're looking at the base Payroll Control Center, you would be able to move that over or mirror in the Employee Central Payroll system, the functionality, if you're using SAP RDS. So there's not and you can even use some of the transports to do that if you're going to keep everything the same. I'll let Stephen talk about the Spinifex component.
I agree with that as well. So the standard stuff, you can move through transports. You can even build transports for our reports to move them as well. And if you didn't want to transport it, we have an upload download mechanism I'm not saying it's you just push a button and everything's gonna go and it's working right out of the box. There's definitely gonna be a couple little cleanup items that you're gonna do to get to the cloud, but we're not talking a re-implementation. We're talking, hours instead of weeks to get it done.
Right.
Okay, great. Thank you. That is all the questions we had from the guests today. We want to thank everyone for their time and attendance, and thank you to our speakers, Stephen and Mike. You will see the screen today, some contact information for them. If you have any additional questions, please also feel free to send us an email at info@spinifexit.com. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you all.